Well, good morning, everybody. I like the Little League coach, Dad. That's a good addition to some of the after dinner conversation we had last night. I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of the campaigning process for change, and specifically within the kind of the issue of mobility, but also somewhat in general. Before we got started this morning, I was met with Eileen and Bob Binke yesterday, and Bob talked about jitneys yesterday, and whenever there's a natural disaster or a transit strike, which may be pretty much equivalent to a natural disaster in a lot of cities, one of the things that happens is suddenly all these people pop up and start providing rides to other folks for money. And so it's a very simple and obvious observation that the reason why we don't have lots more people making money out of hauling more than one person from point A to point B is that the government won't let them provide those services. And so anyway, we were talking a little bit about how maybe in Milwaukee some of that could be changed. And I've been involved in a number of those fights in a number of communities, and I find that particular fight to be a great snapshot of how a lot of these fights really are won. And the components, I think of the components like building blocks. You know, when you're a kid, or when you were a kid, would build things out of blocks. You know, you have to, depending on what you want to build, you have to have the right number and shape of blocks, and you got to put them in the right order. You can't start with the capstone, you know, and you can't build it if you don't have the big pieces that go at the bottom or what have you. So you have to really pull all the pieces together. And so with, you know, sort of deregulating taxi and shared ride services, you know, you've got to understand how that market works. You've got to know who wants to be in the business that isn't in the business, because that's the invisible part. The invisible part of that equation is the people who would be providing services, but they're not allowed, so they in fact don't exist. And the people who would be riding it, but aren't because it doesn't exist, and so they're not identified. So they're sort of, they're not identifiable groups. You have to somehow find people who would be in that situation. You also have to find the constituencies that shake up the political balance. And in that case, there's great ones in that the existing system very directly and obviously hurts certain groups. Generally, the disabled cannot get adequate rides from here to there. The existing taxi and bus transit system provides them lousy service. And so usually if you go talk to them about, wouldn't it be nice if there were lots of people competing to give you guys rides places with wheelchair accessible vehicles, and they say yes. Another key group are black churches, because black churches have late night services and taxi companies redline them. Universally, across the country, I've never been in a community where we were having this conversation where I couldn't find a few black pastors who are outraged over the fact that their people cannot get a ride home at night. And so you get those two groups to come into the room, and suddenly this right-wing idea of deregulating transportation services has very left-wing spokesmen, and it upsets the balance of the discussion. And if you can think about how to do that in any issue, right? This is what Randall was getting at last night about the right brain, kind of the right brain spokesman or the right brain representations of an idea. When we think about changing transportation policy or campaigning for mobility, I think we had a lot of discussions yesterday about change at the federal level. And while I think that's an important component of the policy wonky intellectual side of what we're trying to do, as far as campaigning goes, it's a low return area of endeavor. I mean, we're going to see change because it bubbles up, not because Congress suddenly decides to radically change how it thinks about transportation and transportation funding. So basically that's what I'm going to focus on is, you know, how do we actually get something to change, say, in your town or a town and or city. You got to know what you're up against, and we talked some about this yesterday in one of the sessions. The conventional wisdom, we all know the conventional wisdom is that we've got to have less driving and more transit. I mean, that really is sort of the embedded. So we are bucking the conventional wisdom. You know, we're not unleashing what everyone really knows in this particular sense. We kind of are, but I'll get to that later. We're really bucking what everyone really believes is supposed to be the right answer. The folks who are anti-automobile are always there. There's a lot more organized groups of them than there are of auto users. And, you know, probably like AAA, which you would hope would be, which exists in almost every community, and if they actually engaged politically the way they should and represent auto users and show up at every stinking meeting of every public body that's going to talk about anything that has impact on auto drivers, that would get us close to the same place where the anti-auto people are, but we're not there. So they're always there, and they're always vocal, and that's a reality you have to confront. And like we talked about a little bit last night even, automobile drivers are guilty. They're like smokers. Because the conventional wisdom is that there's too much driving, everybody thinks it's, you know, it's all you people who drive too much, you know. I can't drive as much as I want to, and I have to feel guilty about it because of you out there too. You know, it's like, what's the problem? Why is there so, you know, what's the problem on California's road? Too many Californians, you know. And so that guilt, you know, that guilt prevents, which is why I think you get the reflexive man on the street response to what should we do about congestion is, oh, we should build more transit, because if that'll get some of them off the road, then I don't have to change. And that's really what we want, but we can't, you know, we can't overcome that guilty feeling. So there's a reality. Bob Brugman actually made a great point yesterday just in a hallway conversation that we are way behind in this debate, as in a lot of debates, on the sloganeering and terminology. You know, they've got induced demand, and they've got auto-dependent, and, you know, I mean, if I spent more time thinking, they've got all kinds of spiffy terms to describe the things that we should feel guilty about. And we don't really have, you know, all the spiffy terms that would more accurately describe those things. You know, I don't, and I'm not particularly good at that. We need people who are good at that. But, you know, instead of induced demand, maybe something like pent-up travel, which is really what it is. I mean, induced demand is not anything that's been induced. It's just people who said, ah, crap, I can't go to this party or whatever because there's too much traffic. And in fact, it's pent-up desire to travel that is unleashed by not having congestion, keeping them from being able to travel. You know, an auto-dependent should be something more like auto-enabled, or I don't know. That sounds a little bit dirty, but something along those lines. You know? But he raises a good point that one of the missing pieces in our campaigning is seizing the terminology and getting that terminology into the debate. Congestion coalition is a great one. As that sort of gets used more and gets out there, it's a great, you know, moniker to hang on those people, I think. When you're challenging the conventional wisdom, you know, first of all, you got to recognize it's going to be a longer run battle. You've got to be, you know, ubiquitous and persistent. And we do a lot, I think, of too narrowly picking our battles. And again, you know, the anti-auto folks are in every possible venue, always. And we're here and there when it's worth our time. You know, and that's, if you really want to run, you know, a campaign, a local campaign, you got to be willing to go wherever, you know, whatever cheesy group might be having a discussion on this, you've got to be willing to be there. So you've got to be ubiquitous and you've got to be persistent. And the cultural change element is sort of another barrier we've got to overcome. We as, you know, most of the groups, even grassroots groups, focus on what do we need to change? It's why it's easy to talk about changing the federal funding formula, because it's very containable. Even talking about what the MPO does in your metro area, it's very containable. What the city council does is very containable. Getting at people's attitudes, the smoker's guilt that auto drivers have, that's hard. I mean, how do you, if you're Hearst and you own a national newspaper chain, you can get your mind around how to go after that. But if you're us, it's much more difficult. And we, that's, again, Randall really prodded us last night to think about that. And both Greg and I had this idea for some time about, NASCAR, right? As a good idea. But after we broke up last night, somebody and was, oh, okay. Hey, you're here. All right.
I'm just curious who broke up with us.
Yeah. No, after dinner broke up last night. But he had the great idea that there's and I can't, is it VH1 that has MTV has a show called Pimp Your Ride, and my local radio station has these Pimp Your Ride competitions, but there is sort of a bit of a youth kind of a culture thing going on right now, as there is repeatedly about cool cars, right? And the Pimping Your Ride is the latest version of a cool car for the 25-year-old to the 16 to 25-year-old set. But what good is it to have a really cool car if you can only use it at noon and midnight? Now the midnight part's not so bad, but still you get out of school, you can't get anywhere, you get off the job, you can't get anywhere. You've got a cool car stuck in traffic is really a travesty. And you can think of great visuals with that. Now on the upside, you've got a lot of amenities in your car if you've really pimped your ride. But but still, you're spending all your time trying not to rear-end the guy in front of you. If you get too into your amenities, then you dent your fender and you're not very happy. So we need 50 Cent out there rapping about congestion is what we really need. And then the other John actually brought up that in a campaign they had organized MAD, Mothers Are Driving, and kind of equivalent to the Little League.
Why do you need to be here?
Well, you share your ideas. But and John can elaborate. But kind of like this, the soccer coach dad. If you could think of one set of travelers for whom transit serves really poorly, it's the moms and all the errands they've got to run every stinking day of their life. It's sort of easy to imagine getting quintessential moms up and talk about how they can't get from here to there, they can't make it to all of the things they've got to accomplish every day thanks to congestion. So these right brain unconventional spokespeople, I think, are as yet uncapitalized, on a broad scale by our movement, but we're not really making full use of them locally either. And that the great thing about those are all things you can kind of tackle in your own local campaign. Now I come from a research organization, not an activist or grassroots organization, so I have no experience with grassroots, so I can't really talk a lot about that. We have, in the past few years, had quite a bit of success at what I call, myself, and I make no claim that this is a great term, but I call it grass clumps strategy, because the idea is we don't have the mechanisms or the means to really get out to the grassroots, but anytime a bunch of those blades of grass gather together, that I can target, so. Grass clumps, Hans.
The problem is they often go to the compost pile.
Oh boy, we could have a. But the idea here is that first of all, because we're against the conventional wisdoms, we have to start saying the things that people, at least to some degree, know but can't say because of auto driver guilt or what have you. And at the same time, you can't just criticize the status quo. You've got to have alternatives. so you're saying what they know to be true but aren't willing to say, and you're providing the alternative to what appears to be the only right way to address the problem. And in this case, probably the centerpiece of that is the fact that we can build our way out of congestion. Everybody believes that the real problem, the real reason why, you can't find an outlet for your auto guilt is there just isn't, we just can't have enough capacity for everyone to drive. And that's just not true. That's the conventional wisdom that you have to assail. And to do that, you're going to have, those building blocks, those messages, the research, et cetera, and you've got to get it in front of a lot of people that you otherwise wouldn't. I'm actually become a big fan of the Rotary and Kiwanis circuit because those are those people are not policy people. They're just local business folks, or not even all of them are business folks. I mean, it's all kinds of regular folks essentially that get together to sing silly songs and raise money for charity, basically. And they're always looking for speakers, and they don't often hear somebody come in and challenge them to think fundamentally differently about a public policy issue. And so it's a great way to get at essentially a lot of grassroots without necessarily launching a grassroots campaign as such. Along with that, you've got to build a coalition, and coalition building is tricky. Mobilizing different groups of messages. Again, the other side is very good at that. Not only are they always there, but they're always there representing 8 different groups. And we don't have 8 different groups, so we can't even put that many acronyms on our letters and so forth. But the more visible you are, the easier it is to get coalition members to join on, and also endorsers. Never overlook the occasional person who has some name recognition, be it a city council member or something like that, that sees the light and get their endorsement, even if they're not really to go out and stump for it. Just having their name sort of on the campaign can be a big help. I guess the bottom line of all of this is the elements. I don't think you can really think about this the same way you think about a political campaign, and I don't think you can think about it the same way you think about sort of organizing a local charity, because it's a weird blend in between the two. You've got to have those things that mobilize people to care about the issue, but if you've got people who are mobilized to care about the issue and you don't have sort of the understanding of how the policy process works, how political pressures come to bear, and how actual solutions might be implemented, that's sort of the worst case scenario, is where people actually get mad and they march on City Hall and everybody agrees that we've got to have change, but because there isn't a clear and well thought out and well understood plan in the real world, what happens is change gets implemented because the torches and pitchforks came in the room, but it's crappy change. And so now you haven't won, you haven't solved the problem, but they can credibly stand up and say, look, you demanded that we do something, we did something, everyone agreed to that something, and quit complaining. Never mind that it didn't solve the problem. So change that doesn't actually get what we want is in some ways worse than not having got the change at all, because you've spent the energy of the grassroots not to get where you want to go. So you can't underestimate the importance of actually working out in advance all those technical details. And I'll just circle back right now to what Bob talked about then at the beginning yesterday. When we've thought about this mobility project and we sort of think about something very specific like the city of Atlanta, we recognize that it's iteration after iteration after iteration of having to come to Atlanta, work with Benita and Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and hammer away at all these conventional wisdoms answer all of the criticisms that they're going to raise, build the coalition, get the spokesman, find the local rapper, whatever it's going to be, and eventually, when there really is a willingness to say, okay, you're right, we need to revise our long-range transportation plan to really have thoroughly worked out what needs to be done then, so that we're fighting in every moment of that discussion for the right changes, not just for, okay, really, we've got to do something, we'll add some HOV lanes, winds up being the solution, and we've just wasted 2 years of effort. Anyway, that's it.